Welcome back to the Crimson Archives, our second edition. I don't know if you caught our first one, but hopefully you did. But back again for more. Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast, and we got IU Artifacts joining us once again as well. Welcome back.
How we doing?
Yeah, doing good. We are back in 1994, and a bit of a trip down memory lane for both of us here. You far more proximally. We're looking at the IU Purdue game from Assembly Hall that took place in, I believe it was either late January or early February of 1994. We got Alan Henderson up at the free throw line here shooting free throws. Let's set this game up as we roll through here. This is an important game, very tight Big Ten race early on. Purdue, at this point, one of the more highly regarded teams in the country. IU, still relatively highly regarded in the top 20. IU's already lost once to Purdue this season. They're trying to avenge that loss and get themselves back in the thick of the Big Ten title race.
Yeah, this is, Glenn Robinson's leading the country, if I'm not mistaken, in scoring, which 28 points a game plus. And, this is an up-and-down season for IU. They started the year losing to Butler. At Butler, and then they come back and beat Kentucky. This, if you remember that memorable Damon Bailey cover of the Sports Illustrated that came out right after that. So this was an up-and-down season. There's a lot of veterans on this team, but it's a very young team. It's a big team. It's probably the biggest team height-wise that Knight ever had. He had, I think, 5 guys above 6'8", and he had 2 7-footers.
There's one of them, and Richard Mandeville, who just committed a foul.
Yeah, he's a freshman this year. This incoming class was really good. Bob Gibbons named him a top 5 class, even though Mandeville and the other big guy, Robbie Eggers, were considered projects. But you had Sharon Wilkerson, who was an All-American. You had Rob Foster, who seemed to just not even be seen in Bloomington. His time here was so limited. And then you had Steve Hart, who I think is still as freak of an athlete as we've ever had, maybe with, Victor, but yeah, definitely.
5 minutes, 11 seconds left here. IU up by 6. They had been up by 10 just about 45 seconds earlier, but this Purdue team had already come back on IU. IU had a big lead on them in the first game, and IU struggling to hold on to the lead in that game. It ends up going to overtime. They lose there, and they're struggling to hold on to the lead in this one as well as Damon Bailey misses the shot.
Yeah, it's funny. You'll notice Brian Evans is wearing the shirt. This is when his shoulder problems reemerged. We were talking about this earlier, but I know that this was a nagging issue for him because he had to wear that shirt, but this was really Damon Bailey's team. He was kind of in the shadows. He had not averaged more than about 11, 12 points up until this point. But this senior year, he's going to be the guy. He'll go on to be an All-American and first-team All-Big Ten. But this is really his team. And he played through some tremendous injuries that not a lot of people even today really knew about, these ab issues. And you can see there Evans is getting some work on that shoulder. This was really a nagging thing that was going to hamper his IU career quite a bit, and he worked through it because obviously he was a tremendous player.
Bruce Weber on the sidelines there, the assistant for Gene Cady. Yeah, I mean, Evans basically wearing a flak jacket out there, trying to keep that shoulder in place. And it's amazing when you look back on it how many injuries this IU team dealt with, because it wasn't just Bailey, it wasn't just Evans, it was also, Pat Graham not whole. I mean, this was certainly the healthiest season he had since his freshman year, but he'd had 3 foot breaks, I think, in the 2 years that followed that, and he'd only played half the season the previous year.
Right.
The fact that he played the full year this year was kind of a surprise, but this IU team. Really a 3-guard lineup for IU most of the season, at least as far as starters were concerned, which was, again, relatively unorthodox for Bob Knight teams.
Yeah, you have Leary, who's kind of a veteran. He came in early on. If you remember, in the early 90s, he was, the guy that was supposed to bring Eric Montross to Bloomington. They both were at Lawrence North High School, but he was kind of, we kind of forget about him. We know about his performance in Duke in '92, but he was a very important leader on this team with Bailey, and you can see Henderson with his 4th foul. Henderson had injuries this year. Lindemann had injuries, and Lindemann, you'll notice, is just coming back in. He was foul-plagued this entire game, and he sat on the bench for 13 minutes in the second half before he's kind of coming back in, but a rare standing ovation for Richard Mandeville, which, sorry, that's cutting a little too deep, but, anyways.
Free throw here by Robinson. Another empty possession on that last possession for IU, and just this was the problem that sometimes this IU team had was as many guys that could score, they did occasionally struggle with execution over key stretches. And, Purdue was obviously a very good team. You had Glenn Robinson on this team. You had Conzo Martin was on this team. This was, you could make an argument, the best Purdue team that Gene Cady ever coached as they go to a timeout here. They went to the Elite Eight. They lost to, was it Duke or Kansas? I think it was Duke that they lost to in the Elite Eight that year. But there was a Purdue team that, just because of their talent, was able to make up a lot of points in a short period of time. And it was certainly an IU team that, when you look at what they were able to do in terms of sorry for the blank screen here, folks. This was taped off of a wild satellite feed off of the Big Dish satellite. So we're going to have some weird gaps. This was the old Channel 4 feed, actually, that was being fed out to people on antenna. But yeah, it was a very, very good Purdue team. And, it was really probably a better Purdue team than even the teams that Katie had in the late 80s, the Everett Stevens, Mel McCants teams.
Absolutely. And we were talking about this earlier. This Indiana team, this is probably that turning point when we talk about good, solid teams with great players, obviously Evans, Anderson, and Bailey. But things are going to change drastically after this season with, Bailey graduating, Leary graduating, and then the mass exodus is going to start year after year where you don't seem to have a lot of sustained solid foundations in play.
Well, and it's interesting you mention that. It always irritates me that, lazy reportage of this era is like, Knight's last 6 teams didn't win a Big Ten title. This team was 13-5.
Yeah.
This team, made it to the Sweet 16. This team, given the fact that it lost the Naismith Award winner from the previous year, lost 3 other seniors who had started for 3 years apiece. I think they did pretty darn well for themselves.
They did, and I've always really liked this team. And again, we were talking about this earlier. This game's a big one for me. Is that this was the first Purdue game I got to go to, and I was 11 when this was played. So this has always been my favorite game in Assembly Hall. Period. And yeah, you guys can bring up Kentucky all you want, but I wasn't there, so I'm not going to talk about it. But yeah, this is we're getting into crunch time here, and things are getting tight.
And it's interesting, IU has to play Todd Lindemann here. Lindemann he didn't play that regularly at this point in his career, but you've still got Alan Henderson, and you could see just the amount of movement that this offense is still running. It seems like it changes over the next few years, but at least for this year, Purdue's playing some great defense here though, and IU's really having trouble getting the ball inside. And they're settling for outside shots, or they're settling for bad drives. Fortunately, they get the rebound back there. And then Damon Bailey bails them out on that. That's great.
Bailey, if you think about the performances they had, the Kansas game, he had 30-some points. One
of the great lost performances in IU basketball history, that game at Kansas this year, where he hits a three-pointer from like 25 feet to tie it, and then Jacques Vaughn comes down and hits one from the friggin' Kansas logo to win the game. But, he had some incredible performances this year.
This was a tense game.
Link Darner that shot there? Wow.
This was a very tense game because
Herb Dove out there.
Any Purdue game is, but there was a lot on the line, as you said, and Robinson, there's his 39 points right there.
Yeah.
Just insane that we were still in the ball game with this performance. But it was, this one was big for a lot of reasons, and it came down. And to me, this is one of the better Purdue games of the early 90s, period, regardless of what games you look at.
Well, this was coming off a stretch where IU had really dominated this series. They'd lost, I think, 1 game out of the previous 6, and that was a fluke game, frankly, that last game of the 92 season that cost IU the Big Ten title. It cost them the 1 seed in the Midwest.
Right.
But this game was
Bailey just creating everything. It's amazing.
Bailey just was an incredible player. He really gets undersold in the history of IU basketball.
Yeah.
But this game had the level of vigor to it that a lot of those games really from the 80s all the way through to about this time had. And really largely because IU's talent base starts to deteriorate at this particular stage, get to 95, 96. The shine starts to come off it a little bit, I think, at least in terms of the way IU responded to the game. Certainly Purdue got very fired up. They would win their first of 3 consecutive Big Ten titles in this year.
Yeah, and
Ian Standback. There we go. Yeah, some names, some blasts from the past coming out here.
Konzo Martin,
Yeah.
But again, this is the way this game's going to kind of conclude is one that I don't think many people are going to see coming. But I just remember it was a nail-biter back and forth because no matter who you put, I remember they switched up defenses constantly on Glenn Robinson, and nothing was working. They had Bailey on him for most of the game. But
nice pass.
Yeah. And honestly,
that's terrible. That's unfortunate right there.
And Henderson could hit that throughout his career, and he's one of those guys that I think that we don't think about.
No, he's tremendously undersold. You look at his stat lines, and you're just
amazing.
like, my God, it's like looking at Calbert Cheney's shooting statistics. That just it's like this baffles the mind. So this was the first year, I think, of the – no, I'm sorry. Yeah, maybe it was. Was either this year or next year was the first year of the 35-second shot clock. They just switched from 45 seconds. But IU having to play some defense here on this last possession.
Yeah.
I think we've got a GTE ad going on here, speaking of blast from the past.
Yeah, this is you're getting a little bit of everything here, folks. You're welcome. You're welcome.
IU in this game, there was a lot going on in the league just beyond Purdue finally kind of getting over the hump. They'd had a lot of these players the previous year, but we're still in the process of putting it all together. They hadn't played a particularly tough non-conference schedule, and a lot of people wondered if maybe they were a little fraudulent as a result of that. But they proved themselves throughout the course of the year. But you also had the remnants of the Fab Five. Chris Webber was gone, but the other four were still there.
Right.
You had Michigan State starting to get things kicked back into gear a little bit. I think it was either Steve Smith or Sean Respert was around in this particular era. There were a lot of interesting things going on in the Big Ten. It was a very tough Big Ten race. This was also Wisconsin had played relatively well. Stu Jackson was the head coach at that time. Rashard Griffith, I think, had come and gone by that stage, but Michael Finley, I think, was either on the team or was about to be on the team. So it was a really, we talk about like the golden era of Big Ten basketball. You're looking at kind of the tail end of that even here as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of evolution that's going to happen throughout. Wisconsin's really going to start getting to be much more of a dominant force in the Big Ten when it was really the doormat for so many years. But, and this is, getting toward the end really –
it's an interesting move. Yeah. He's got Henderson up top, probably to try to save him from a foul perspective, thinking this might go into overtime. He's certainly not guarding Robinson.
And Lindemann had 4-2.
And that's a really good shot by Herb Dove. To go up and over a 7-footer, even if it was Todd Lindemann, who's not the most athletic guy in the world. So
I think everybody in Assembly Hall at this point was thinking overtime.
Yeah.
Because Knight, as usual, is not going to call He's not going to call a timeout, and then you hammer the guy that you least expect to make the free throws because, as I said earlier, Lindemann had been on the bench an awful lot this game.
Well, and even if he hadn't been on the bench, no offense to Todd Lindemann, this was not a guy that you're thinking of as even your fourth option offensively on this play.
No, and I don't think he was ever above 70% from the foul line period, and that's respectable. But and again, he's not. He was a solid player as an upperclassman, but this is still getting his feet wet.
This is embryonic.
Yeah.
Matt Waddell coming over and wrapping the arms around him there. So, Lindemann bouncing the free throw.
Yeah. You can see it was
he had a very fascinating career. He was around forever.
Yeah.
He redshirted.
Almost a Brian Cardinalist.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
He was around for a long time, and to score 12 points in a game like this, it was a real accomplishment for him.
That was huge.
Time out here for Purdue.
2-point lead, and then Katie's going to draw something up, and just got to play good defense. But there's
Dan Dockich.
Yeah.
With a lot of hair.
Yeah.
And an interesting suit choice. This. Pretty tense here, obviously. IU up by 2. You've got some pretty good shooters on the other team. Sure. Robinson being one of them, and anytime I see IU with that kind of a lead, I always think back to Nick Anderson in '89, hitting a shot. Now, granted, that game was tied at the time, but still, you hate leaving it down to the wire like this. But again, it was a similar situation to what happened in the game earlier on in the year at Mackey Arena, where IU had led. Purdue comes all the way back, and then I think IU was still leading at the end. There was a shot that was missed, and then Brian Evans got nailed on a foul, sent Purdue to the line. Henderson had a shot at the end of the game to win it, and ended up, I think, being an air ball, and then IU couldn't score in overtime. And I think that was really a concern here. It was that similar to Illinois in '89, where both games that IU played against them, they had big leads, and then the leads got frittered away.
Right.
It's like, can we really close out against a team with the type of athleticism and talent that Purdue's got? And it's interesting because IU shooting very good from the free throw line in this game. They had struggled a bit this year, and in fact, in that Purdue game, I think they were something like 2 of 9 or 2 of 10 from the line for the second half and overtime of that game.
Right. It'll be interesting if they were going to draw something for Robinson here, or if they were going to try to do some kind of, decoy plan.
You can almost be guaranteed that as soon as they lined up, Bob Knight was going to call timeout so that he could come back and actually talk to his players about what they were planning on doing.
Yep.
This was a common thing that happened with Bob Knight teams. You saw it in the '87 tournament run, probably most famously, where LSU's final inbounds play with 6 seconds to go. Knight waits for them to line up, calls timeout, and then brings everybody back in. Same thing happened in the Syracuse game. He was famous for doing that because it basically causes the opposition to either run a decoy play at the beginning and then go to what they want to, or line up with their best stuff and then basically allow Knight to see what was going on and then come back and try to do something to fix it.
Yeah. Gosh, I miss the 90s.
Oh, this was such these
you
car
youngins, you college people now, you don't know. You had no idea how good it was.
This was very early 90s too. Like, it was 94, but this was some pretty cutting edge stuff. When you consider what was on network television.
You mentioned that Illinois game with Nick Anderson. If people haven't seen that, if you want to see the most incredible shot in the history of college basketball, you have to see the play right before with Jay Edwards.
Yeah,
he shot it over the top of the basket. You can find the clip. And is the game on? Is the full game? I
have not uploaded it, but
Big Ten has a little clip.
It is up. Yeah, there is a clip of it that you can watch, and I do recommend. I remember I was hiding in my parents' bedroom. I was like 9 for that last shot, and then I was very disappointed when I came out and found out we'd lost. So, anyway, inbounds play here to finish this game up. Lindemann not 100% certain what they wanted to do.
It was good defense.
Now Purdue calls timeout.
Yeah, it was really good defense.
Yeah, they did a good job of denying pretty much all the entry points there.
This is when a lot of people were going nuts, though, because that's 3 consecutive timeouts, and everybody's just, wanting the game to end, obviously on a positive note. And, and there's enough people in the crowd that have seen, the end of games, or probably most recently that Illinois game, that they don't want to see something drawn up that's going to just devastate them.
Now, there was a lot on the line other than just the Big Ten race this year with this particular game, as far as what IU had done in Assembly Hall.
So, they were going for their 42nd consecutive home game one, which would be the continuing the longest home court winning streak in the country. Which
had been going – it had been the longest – I mean, the streak had been going since, I think, 91.
Right.
But it had been the longest since the previous year. The day that they beat Michigan at home with the Fab Five was also the day that UNLV finally lost at home, I think, to Oklahoma, and they had won like 63 in a row at home. Right. And this was a streak that would go on for a while after this.
It's
not the spoiler alert.
No, yeah. Like I said, relish this season, folks. Relish this season. You can see Sharon Wilkerson on the bench there. He's kind of a lot of what could have been, a McDonald's All-American. But, this was a tense moment at the end of the game because now everybody's kind of figured it out, and you go into your defensive set and figure out what you're going to do here.
Yeah, Indiana just throwing everybody into the front court here, which is interesting. And this is maybe the weirdest camera angle in the history of camera angles for the end of a game. So you get Matt Waddell with the basketball.
2 Link Darner. Yeah. And I remember Katie.
Katie
was wanting for a foul.
Katie flips up here.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, there's going to be a pretty interesting. Dan Dockage is going to smack Knight on the ass, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, here it comes. I remember just seeing this in the replay, but Yeah, there you go.
Bruce Weber's just pissed.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. And I remember this.
Knight's throwing his fist in the air.
My dad and I were still in our seats for that, and then we got out of there and started running. And the whole concourse, everybody was running down, obviously to get home, but running out and screaming and yelling because it was a hell of a game.
Yeah. Just a remarkable game, one that I've put up on YouTube. You can watch the entire thing if you'd like to. I would recommend doing so. It's got Don Fisher and Max Skirvin on the radio call. That's the best way to watch it, certainly. Watch the whole game. It is really fascinating. And really any games from this season I think are worth catching up on. I mean, there were certainly some lowlights. The 50-point loss at Minnesota was one that a lot of people like to dwell on from that year, but there were a lot of really good moments as well. So,
in a twist of fate, you could see, or on a different note, you can see Ross Hales have a solid game against Minnesota, the walk-on. So
that's right.
Our buddy Brian Tonsoni, that's his brother-in-law. He was a really good football player for IU that walked on that season. So
that'll wrap it up for this episode. We'll be back with more hopefully soon for IU Artifacts. I'm Galen from Crimson Cast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Enjoy the basketball season.
Indiana Hoosier basketball, brought to you by Coca-Cola. Always IU, always Coca-Cola. Your Central Indiana Dodge dealers. Hook's Drugstore. More of what a drugstore is for. The Hoosier Lottery, a proud sponsor of Indiana University basketball. Indiana's Rural Electric Cooperatives, a power partnership providing safe and efficient electric energy to 1 million Hoosiers. Midas. Try the Midas way, the way it should be. Pioneer Hybrid International Incorporated and your local Pioneer sales representative, PSI Energy. Call the PSI professional today for ways to save energy and your money. TW